Friends of the media, good evening. Welcome to the press conference. In a moment, the chief executive and the relevant officials will first make some opening remarks, and then they will take questions from you. Because of the epidemic, please try to keep your distance in this press conference. Now I invite the chief executive to speak. Friends of the media, members of the public, at the very first instance, I'm here to report to you the situation about Kwai House and other blocks in Kwai Chung Estate. I want to give you an update on the latest situation and also the actions we have taken. And also I'm going to announce the further actions to be taken now, so that we could just try to stop the spread of the disease, and hopefully then we are able to cut off the transmission chains involving the Omicron strain. Now, in terms of the numbers, at the press briefing by the Center for Health Protection at 4:30 just now, and also for cases related to Kwai Chung Estate, for both confirmed and preliminary positive cases, there are a total of 105 cases involving 3 blocks. Yat Kwai House, 96 cases, Yin Kwai House, 8 cases, Hill Kwai House, 1 case. So in total, 105 cases involving 3 blocks in Kwai Chung Estate. Now, from the investigation of the CHP, it is believed that the source of this outbreak has to do with a lady who quarantined at the Soka Seaview Hotel. She was infected there, and then when she got home, she infected her family members and close contacts. And then the infected person went to the refuse room in Yat Kwai House in Kwai Chung Estate, and there he might have come into contact with a cleaner working at Yat Kwai House, and that led to this outbreak. Now, the variant strain is confirmed to be Omicron BA.1.2, and we know this is a highly transmissible strain. And information from WHO and other sources tells us that in 2 to 3 days, there could be exponential growth in number of confirmed cases involving this strain. That's why we've got this outbreak. Now, at Kwai House in Kwai Chung Estate, the first case was found on the 20th of January. At the time, there were 9 confirmed and preliminary positive cases. It was the 20th of January, so you could see how it spread so quickly. And then yesterday, the 21st of January, already there's a total of 20 cases. That means the number of cases is doubled. And then just now I gave you the number of 105 cases, including both confirmed and preliminary positive cases. So it's an increase of 5 times. That's why we're worried that the exponential increase in Omicron cases, as we've seen in other parts of the world, has now happened at Kwai Chung Estate. Now, the index case involved this cleaner working at the refuse room. So that's why at the first instance we tried to check where she's been about in Kwai Chung Estate. Now, the cleaner provides cleaning service at Yat Kwai House, but she lives on the 14th floor of Yin Kwai House herself. And that's another case involving a cleaner living at Hill Kwai House. You can see here the layout of the different blocks. And then for this Hill Kwai House cleaner, she was identified by taking voluntary tests, because at the time there's no compulsory testing. And that's why we found out about the case. And so the housing department has engaged a single contractor to provide cleaning service for all 16 blocks of Kwai Chung Estate. And so housing department is trying to find out about the working arrangement for cleaners here. The index case, the cleaner works at Yat Kwai House, and she only works at Yat Kwai House. She works in the refuse room and on different floors for refuse disposed by residents. these bags of refuse are placed in the refuse room, and then probably refuse chute, and then she would collect the refuse. And so, as I said, this case is probably linked to the Silka Seaview Hotel case. And then, according to the contractor, this cleaner is a casual worker at the other worker. And that is the second cleaner. She's a casual worker. She doesn't work in a particular block. And when there is need for cleaning service at any block, then this casual worker will be deployed there. So that's why she could have worked at all 16 blocks of Kwai Chung estate. And we confirmed from the contractor that there are some 40 plus cleaners working at Kwai Chung estate, as Dr. Chung told you. And all these 40 workers listed as close contacts, they will be arranged to go into Penny's Bay Quarantine Center. While they may have served different blocks, but then for all cleaners of the same contractor, it is possible that they may meet each other, they may say, greet each other, they may chat to each other, or even have meal boxes together. So that's why all cleaners of the estate are considered close contact, and they have to be quarantined. Now, this all happened in just 2 or 3 days, and we've seen exponential growth in infected cases. So we've taken measures already to try to cut off the transmission chain. In the past year or two, that's what we've been doing. We've been trying to adopting a strategy of early identification, early isolation, and early treatment to deal with cases. On the 19th of January, the index case was identified, and already we imposed restriction testing declaration at Kwai House on that day. And then after the first test, there's need for repeated tests for the residents there. And then yesterday, we took another measure because we know that the situation has become worse. And so the Secretary for Food and Health has announced a 5-day restriction testing declaration. In the past 2 years, we've never had such a stringent measure before. So it's the first time. So this declaration will last till 7 a.m. on the 26th of January. And the residents of Kwai House will have to take 5 tests in this period. And then the third measure we've taken was at 4 a.m. today, because we found about cases at Ying Kwai House. So at 4 a.m. today, we also imposed a restriction testing declaration on Ying Kwai House. Now, the compulsory testing will only end at 7 p.m. today, and even if the testing finishes at 7 p.m., we may have to wait another an hour or so to see if the results are if there are any positive results or not. But then for this round of testing for Ying Kwai House starting at 4 a.m. today, the first batch that covered 940 tests, already we found 8 to 10 preliminary positive cases, so it's worrying. That's why I'm going to announce further measures now. There are a number of them. Firstly, as there's an outbreak at Ying Kwai House, because as I mentioned, we started testing at 4 a.m. today. In the first batch, already we found some 8 to 10 cases. So therefore, for Ying Kwai House, we're going to handle it like that for Yat Kwai House. That means 5 days of restriction testing, and we will start the operation very soon. But then the arrangement will be better than that for Yat Kwai House, because at 4 a.m. today, the restriction testing declaration was in effect. So that means Ying Kwai House residents have not been allowed to leave other than to get out of the unit for compulsory testing downstairs. So that's why from 7 p.m. we are going to impose the second restriction testing declaration. So there's no chance for residents of Ying Kwai House to leave their units, therefore. That's the first measure. And then there are support services provided to Yak Kwai House, and the same services will be provided to Ying Kwai House. It's already 6 p.m., but it would be difficult for us to arrange a dinner tonight because usually it takes us about 4 hours to arrange for meal box suppliers to provide meal boxes. So we ask for the understanding of Ying Kwai House residents. But starting from tomorrow, we're going to provide free meals a day to residents of Ying Kwai House. Second further measure we're taking tonight. There are 4 blocks in Kwai Chung Estate where the restriction testing declaration will be imposed. It is, in short, RTD. That means it won't be a 5-day enclosure, but before the RTD ceases, the residents not allowed to leave. This covers Chin Kwai House, Hill Kwai House, Yok Kwai House, and Ah Kwai House. In fact, it was just about 10 minutes ago we made the decision to include Chin Kwai House in the RTD scope, because just half an hour ago we received news that at Chin Kwai House we have found preliminary positive cases. Chin Kwai House, of course, is not currently under an RTD, and we're grateful to residents for taking the test voluntarily. That's why now we have found quite a number of preliminary positive cases at Chin Kwai House. That's why Chin Kwai House will also be subjected to RTD tonight. For Hill Kwai House, as I said earlier, there's already a case identified there. As for Yok Kwai House and Ah Kwai House, so far there have not been any confirmed or preliminary positive cases because no testing has been done yet. And if people don't have symptoms, probably they won't find out about the infection. But why is it that we have picked these 2 blocks even though there are not yet cases found? Because in terms of the location, you see they are in the same area. There are about 4 parts or 4 sections of the Kwai Chung Estate for Yat Kwai House, Ying Kwai House, Yok Kwai House, Ah Kwai House, and Hill Kwai House. The 5 blocks here, as you can see, they are on the upper left-hand corner. For the other blocks, they are a road away at least. So that's the second measure. The third measure we're taking further is that tonight, for the remaining 11 blocks of Kwai Chung Estate, we've included 5 blocks for computer testing, then the remaining 11 blocks, they will be put under compulsory testing notices, CTN. That means there's no lockdown, but residents will have to take repeated tests over a period of time. To play safe and to be prudent, apart from the 16 blocks of Kwai Chung Estate, there are 2 blocks in between the Kwai Fuk Court. It's originally HOS, but then it's become the quarters for discipline services. So these 2 blocks will also be covered by the compulsory testing notice. So in terms of number, we're talking about a huge number. There are 16 blocks altogether in Kwai Chung Estate, and understand in each block there are over 2,000 residents and some 1,000 units. So just for the 16 blocks of Kwai Chung Estate, we're talking about 35,000 residents, and we count the 2 blocks of quarters. So we're talking about 36,000 persons to be tested. We have the capacity to do so. With our contractors, today we could do over 100,000 tests a day. Yesterday it was a record high. 150,000 tests were done. But very often the constraints are not to do with the testing, but to do with collecting specimens. That is, we need people to help residents to collect the samples. For Kwai Chung Estate, now we have the capacity to collect 10,000 specimens. Tomorrow, we could boost that to 30,000 specimens. So that should be enough to cope with the need for testing for residents. Here, I would like to express my gratitude to the testing contractors, because often they are asked to deploy the manpower with short notice to set up mobile testing stations. Of course, we're also grateful to residents of Kwai Chung Estate. For those who are under the 5-day lockdown requirement, or for those who are subjected to repeated testing, they've all been very cooperative. And we can see that the great majority of residents would come down in an orderly manner to take the test. So now I would like to make an appeal to the public. We have to remain confident. This pandemic has been here for 2 years, and we've seen rapid rebound around the world because of Omicron, because Omicron has taken over from Delta as the primary variant strain is highly infectious. So we have to work together, and I believe we will still be able to stop the spread of Omicron in Hong Kong. Here I would like to make a number of appeals. First, as I said, we're very much grateful to the several tens of thousands of residents in Kwai Chung Estate. Please follow either the 5-day restriction testing declaration or the one-off restriction testing declaration, or the compulsory testing notice without lockdown requirement to take the test. And please try to stay home during this period as far as possible. Please avoid going out as far as possible. The second appeal I'd like to make is for Kwai Chung Estate residents who are not subject to lockdown. Please avoid going out. Please pay attention to personal hygiene. Please do not join any gatherings. For Kwai Chung Estate residents not subject to RTD, but the nature of the work is such that they are exposed to many people. That means they are in high-risk jobs. I would appeal to them to stop going to work for now. I would appeal to employers to join us too in trying to stop the spread of the disease. Because if there are Kwai Chung Estate residents who've been infected and they continue to go to work, especially at a high-risk place, and they may pass on the disease to unvaccinated elderly persons or others in hospitals or institutions, then we're talking about a very dangerous situation. So that's my second appeal. As for other members of the public, please try to avoid gatherings as far as possible, because every gathering carries risk. There could be asymptomatic persons who've been infected, and we don't know where they've been to. So in particular for young children and the elderly, for these age groups, they have relatively lower vaccination rate. And for children, if we've only just started the vaccination program for them, and then for those under the age of 5, they cannot be vaccinated. So please avoid going out as fast as possible, because overseas literature shows that Omicron affects young children particularly, and for unvaccinated elderly, the disease could be fatal. The fourth appeal I'd like to make is, as usual, if you have not been vaccinated, please get vaccinated as soon as possible. Yesterday, there is an encouraging number of vaccination cases. Now, cases dropped slowly, but then it picked up again. Yesterday, some 48,000 people received the jab. And then there are over 20,000 who received their first jab. So for eligible groups, the vaccination rate is 77.5% for the first dose. So we are close to reaching 80%. As for the third dose, if you haven't taken the third dose and you are eligible, please do make a booking as soon as possible to take the third booster shot for your own protection. And perhaps that's another risk factor. Now, when Omicron becomes the mainstream variant strain around the world, it's actually taken over overtaken Delta in terms of infection cases. But then in Hong Kong, because of the hamsters, we are seeing Delta cases again, and then the risk would be serious if this spreads further. Now, for people who think they may have the risk of infection, please take the nucleic acid test as soon as possible. Now, in Kwai Chung Estate, we have set up many mobile testing stations, but we also have community testing centers and other mobile testing stations still in service. Please go and take the nucleic acid test. That is the PCR test. And for the high-risk groups, I would suggest they take the rapid test. The Home Affairs Department is actually giving out free rapid test kits in Kwai Chung, but then that cannot take the place of PCR test because PCR test is more accurate. But in between PCR tests, if you have any concerns, then you could take the rapid test. That is the rapid antigen test, RAT in short. And we will try to provide the test kit as far as possible. Now I invite Mr. Frank Chen, the Secretary for Food, Transport and Housing, to tell you about our operation in Yat Kwai House since yesterday.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Good afternoon. There are 2,700 residents in Yat Kwai House who will be imposed with a 5-day lockdown and restriction testing declaration starting from 6 p.m. yesterday. We led a united action together with the police force, the Department of Health, Home Affairs Department, and the Customs and Excise Department. We have over 250 people helping in the action, and there will also be more people joining us in our action. We understand that a lockdown of 5 days has a huge impact on residents, and there is a need to purchase food. Therefore, starting from yesterday, we have provided 3 meals a day for the residents. Although we cannot satisfy everyone's different tastes, we do provide a small variety of options, including pork, beef, and vegetarian and chicken, so that they will be able to have some choice. During meal deliveries, when we find that there are problems, we would make improvements. And based on individual circumstances, we would provide essentials for those affected. Out of the 2,700 residents, about 700 of them are elderly. We understand that since they will need to be under compulsory testing and that they need to take medicines, we have arranged for 2 nurses to be stationed at our office over there to provide assistance to those in need. We have also set a hotline with 10 people manning the lines to try to address the concerns of the residents and to do follow-up work in order to ensure that the residents can be tested in an orderly manner, other than allowing them to go down at their convenience. We would also call them to remind them to come down for testing. For some residents, we would call them to ask them to come down at a different period when there are huge queues around the testing area, because we want to ensure that everyone will be able to maintain social distancing. And as for those who are physically disabled or inconvenienced, we would send staff to test them at their homes. Yin Kwai House will be under new arrangements this evening, and we are going to handle it in the same manner. And starting from tomorrow, we are going to provide 3 meals for them a day. We urge residents in Yin Kwai House to go down for testing as soon as possible. And we would like to thank the residents in Yat Kwai House and also the entire Kwai Chung estate for being very cooperative. Although residents from Yat Kwai House are under lockdown, we see that they are all quite calm and are cooperating with our colleagues very well. Thank you. It's now time for Q&A. For those who would like to ask questions, please state your organization before you speak and speak through the microphone. Thank you. The lady in the front row. Good afternoon from Hong Kong 01. I'd like to ask for the name of the cleaning contractor in Kwai Chung Estate. This outbreak was caused by this Pakistani man, and he was able to go about freely in the refuse collection stations. So would you actually be holding someone liable for that? Do you think it is caused by environmental issues or caused by human-to-human transmission? Yesterday, we see that residents from Yat Kwai House were standing very close to each other while waiting for testing. So there's actually very close contact between people. And since there are so many residents in Yat Kwai House, there's actually a high risk. Can you calculate the risk of further infection through air-to-air transmission? Did this outbreak start because you did not take firm action at the early stage? So has the infection rate actually spiked because of your slow actions taken? I think you asked 5 questions in total. I would ask Mr. Frank Chen to answer the part about the cleaning contractor and the refuse collection station, and also defer to Dr. Choi for prevention of further outbreak. And then I will also talk about whether we took fast or slow actions to contain the outbreak. Mr. Chen, we're talking about 34,800 plus people living in Kwai Chung Estate. So when everyone has to go for testing, we must make good arrangements. You are correct. There are now 3 testing stations in Kwai Chung Estate. We do not rule out the possibility of adding more testing stations later on. Well, we would keep an eye on the queue. When we see many people waiting, we would have colleagues who are stationed on all floors of Yat Kwai House to ask the residents to return home first, and then we would call them later to notify them that there are now less people waiting and it's convenient for them to go for testing. We would send out friendly reminders to them because we already have the contact number of all the residents. So we would contact them when needed. We only have 1 cleaning contractor in Kwai Chung. I can give you the name. It's Sun Hui Gei in Chinese. But as for the source of transmission, I think I'll have to defer to Dr. Choi. We see there are many cases in Yat Kwai House. We see that confirmed cases are spread out in different floors and different units. And there is a cleaner who is confirmed positive. That cleaner has to go work in different floors and visit the different refuse rooms on each floor. We believe that this source of transmission may have started from the cleaner. We have also inspected the environmental samples and found positive samples. Therefore, public areas may have been contaminated during work. So when people are not vigilant about their personal hygiene, then they may be infected through their eyes and hands. We found contamination on the elevator button on the 8th floor and also inside a refuse room on the 7th floor, and only workers can access that room. It seems from investigation that it could be through air transmission and also through the environment. We understand that there may be a risk during testing, therefore testing will be carried out in open air. We also hope that there will be more distancing between the residents waiting for testing. We do not want too many people gathering. Therefore, during testing, residents are reminded to don their masks properly, to bring hand sanitizers, and stay vigilant. And that will reduce the infection rate.
On the last question, from our experience in the past 2 years fighting the virus, we always have to see whether our actions are carried out in a timely manner, because there are always a risk of infection. So the sooner we could act, the better, of course. But then this is not, entirely about science. And it's not that if something happens, we just push a button and then certain measures could be put in place at once. It may not have anything to do with our capacity. At every high-level steering committee, I would always say that if we need to do something, we will mobilize all our capacity within the government and of the contractors. So we would act quickly and would not sit on our hands, definitely. But then, can we, would the public be happy with everything we do? Can we meet their expectations? Well, as I said, we would very much like to be able to deliver meal boxes to the residents in Yat Kwai House in a timely manner, but then sometimes there are constraints with such operations. And then, as I said earlier, Omicron is highly infectious, so we want to be able to move ahead of the spread of the disease. So what we do now is based on the latest laboratory test results. That is, we're looking at the preliminary positive cases. Even for Chung Kwai House, the cases have not even reached our laboratories. But then from the contractors, we know that there are positive samples. So we're already taking action. So I believe we are moving quickly enough. And then on the 19th of January, as I said, as soon as we found out a confirmed case, we imposed an RTD for a day. And there will actually be repeated tests too. And then we found more cases. That's why on the 21st of January, we have to adopt the most stringent measure of a 5-day restriction testing. Now, would it be more ideal if we could, have continuous RTD instead of having a gap in between? I won't disagree with that. That's why for Yat Kwai House, we are going to impose and another RTD back to back. So residents won't be able to leave, and there won't be any gap in between. So between the two RTDs, so that means residents will be subject to restrictions without any time gap. Now, of course, you appreciate that around the world, all governments are trying very hard to control the spread of the disease, but then the disease is really spreading quickly. So we would just do our utmost, and when we could do better, of course, we will do better to try to prevent the spread of the disease. Next question, please. Next question. Over there. Front row. The gentleman in blue or black. I'm from Phoenix TV. Chief Executive, you said before it's not possible to impose lockdown, but then we're doing that for 2 blocks. So could it be that your early judgment has led to a delay in action? That's why there are now a risk of an outbreak. My second question, this 5-day compulsory home quarantine, is that enough? Look at Kwai. There's a lockdown of 7 days and still they're finding cases. Is it possible that the incubation for some cases could exceed 5 days? So are 5 days enough? And is the coverage large enough? Why don't you do that for the entire Kwai Chung estate? Because there are cleaners who may have worked at all the different blocks. So can you not do that? And my final question is that do you still think it's impossible to do universal testing and compulsory of a compulsory nature? Well, let me explain why we are adopting a 5-day period for RTD. Let me clarify first of all. I never said that lockdown is impossible. It's rather the contrary. If we want to do compulsory universal testing, it has to be done together with lockdown, because we cannot have people doing the test and allowing them to run around freely. So the two have to go hand in hand. If we impose compulsory testing for a particular location, then we have to prevent people from leaving there for the measure to work. And it's not that we have not done it before. I think the first time we did it was last year in Jordan. I visited the area myself. By lockdown, it means that you're not allowed to leave, and there's a time period. You may stop people from leaving for 24 hours or 120 hours. In the past, we've done this kind of lockdown. The nature of RTD, restriction testing declaration, is by nature lockdown. So I have to clarify that point. It's very important. I've never said that we can't impose lockdown in Hong Kong, but rather I've said that if we want a compulsory universal testing, we are talking about a lockdown for the entire population of Hong Kong of more than 7 million people. So you can imagine the impact. And if we don't even talk about Kowloon, we just talk about Kowloon West. Let's say impose lockdown for Kowloon West for 5 days or even just 24 hours, it will be a major operation. And how are we going to make arrangements for the day-to-day living of the general public? So it's really all about common sense. And of course, we may have the capacity to do something, but it's not unlimited. For example, I can't ask you to write 500 reports a day. It will exceed your capacity. So, therefore, with limited capacity, we have to use it in the most effective way. And that's based on our experience in the past 2 years. We see where there could be high risks, say in terms of number of preliminary positive cases identified. And then few places in other world, in other parts of the world have done as us, that we do sewage testing. When we find positive cases, we would actually do sewage testing. RTD is in itself a form of lockdown, as I said. In the past year, we have done over 130 RTDs. That means over 100,000 people have been subjected to lockdown. They were not allowed to leave their home until we have completed the compulsory test, and then they would have to wear a wristband, and the band has to be removed before they can leave. So how do we do lockdown for the entire Hong Kong? I think that's a practical issue. We have to consider. So we have to see whether we could do it. I've never said we can't do lockdown. We're doing that actually every day. But just that this time round, we are doing a 5-day lockdown for people to stay at home. Of course, there are reasons for that. I would ask Dr. Choi to explain that to you.
For the 5-day compulsory testing and banning people from leaving their homes, we do have scientific base. We know that the incubation period for Omicron is quite short, around 3 days. If the source of infection comes from a worker who has already left the premises, then there will only be environmental transmission. And so we would see whether those infected can be tested or can be found positive. So we believe that within 3 to 4 days, we'll be able to identify the transmission. There may also be infection between people, and we hope that with some flexibility of 5 days, we'll be able to identify that source as well. Upcoming, we would look at the positive numbers each day, and we would see whether this method is really effective. And of course, we need to look at the logic. Too long a lockdown will actually have an adverse impact on the residents. Therefore, we do have to strike a balance. The lady reporter in the second row. Hello from Now TV. Currently, there will not be a lockdown for the whole Kwai Chung estate, but nearby Thai War House estate has also seen 2 cases today. So is this estate also facing a high risk of infection? The chief executive just now said that we see both Delta and Omicron in Hong Kong right now, and she said she's confident that the transmission could be controlled. But we have 2 sources of transmission right now. Is there a really high risk for Hong Kong? The CE has appealed to residents who live in Kwai Chung estate, if they work in clinics or elderly homes, to stop going to work for the time being. So would you be providing compensation for the affected workers? So what can residents do if they do not have dinner tonight? Can they actually call food delivery? First of all, we see changes every day, even every half day. For the past 2 days, I've been holding meetings on a frequent basis to try to handle this as soon as possible. The outbreak is in a public housing estate, but it takes many different departments to impose the lockdown. Today, with Ying Kwai House also going to be locked down, and 4 other houses subject to compulsory testing under the RTD, then you would need the engagement of many departments. In the past, for government buildings, it's under the HA. For private housing, it's under HJD, but for public housing, under the housing department. But we cannot actually try to divide this up right now. We have to work together. If we're all willing to take one extra step, then we'll be able to fight the pandemic. The government will provide assistance for special circumstances. Otherwise, we would not have come out with the Anti-Epidemic Fund 5.0. Well, right now the priority is not talking about compensation. We need to really be united, to work together, to show solidarity. We are all in the same boat. We must do our best to provide convenience, but we cannot really please everyone at the same time. As Mr. Frank Chen said earlier, the residents in Kwai Estate are really cooperative. 90% of the residents underwent compulsory testing, which really helped us identify positive cases in a speedy manner. Yes, there is a risk in Tai Wo Hao. We are going to monitor the situation and to roll out our measures as needed. We do see a risk of both the Omicron and Delta variant. Well, although we were able to take some actions against hamsters, which were carrying the Delta variant, and which some animal lovers have opposed to, you have to understand that we need to strike a balance. I understand pet owners will be unhappy, but we do have to take public interest as our first priority. Next question. Mr. Frank Chen, we have to understand that it's home quarantine, and for restriction testing declaration, we are trying to control the pandemic. Therefore, within this area, other people cannot enter the premises. So they will not be able to really order delivery. But for those who need medicines, then we would allow family members to bring those in. But then we will not entertain food delivery during the RTD. Next question, please.
So with tens of thousands of residents required to get tested, how will the authorities reduce the risk of them getting infected while waiting to get tested? And secondly, will the government consider compensating the residents of the five blocks in Kwai Estate for the 5-day lockdowns, as some of them may not be able to go to work during this period? And lastly, does the current outbreak at the Kwai Estate show that it's simply quite impossible to prevent the spread of the Omicron variant? Would the government consider adjusting the current zero COVID policy? Thank you.
I will invite Dr. Choi to answer the question how we could reduce infections while arranging for the residents to undergo the tests. On the question of compensation, my response is in an epidemic of this nature, inevitably, businesses and individuals will be affected to varying extent. Some will be more affected, some will be less affected. But inevitably, a lot of people will be affected because we have put in so many measures on social distancing, on restricting people's movement, on compelling people to take tests, and so on and so on. So I hope that we are acting in concert to tackle this COVID-19 epidemic. At the moment, it is not a question of compensation. It is a question of getting out of the COVID-19 epidemic, especially relating to the Omicron variant, as soon as possible. And of course, apart from this sort of lockdown of people, we have been putting a lot of people in quarantine for a much longer period. So they will be out of job for a much longer period. But they are making this sacrifice in order to contribute to the anti-epidemic efforts of Hong Kong. And I'm extremely grateful for all those people who have been adversely affected as a result of these measures. Now, people have been asking about this COVID zero policy. I have said it many times. It is not absolute zero. It is, in Chinese, is 动态清零. Is a form of trying to tackle whenever there is a case, okay? And this is also the mainland's strategy. They have been having this sporadic outbreak in various cities, especially in recent days. So the important thing is, under our strategy, we strengthen our capacity to tackle these episodic outbreaks in order to suppress the spread of the variant as soon as possible, so that there will not be a massive community outbreak in Hong Kong. So we are not sort of absolutely attaining zero as a strategy. But the alternative to this type of strategy will be the so-called living with the virus. In other words, we open our borders, we have no social distancing measures, we will, like one of the country, announce that you don't even have to wear your mask. In my view, Hong Kong does not possess the prerequisites for going that approach. One is because we still want to open a border, not only with the mainland, but also with the rest of the world. And secondly is our vaccination rate. It's not yet ideal. Mainland has attained over 90%. Singapore has attained over 90%. We are still, as far as the first dose is concerned, it's 77.5%, especially it is very low amongst the elderly. And if the elderly get infected, the consequences are very, very serious. So I want to add that although many people said that Omicron is not very serious, most of the cases are stable, which is the fact today in Hong Kong situation. All the Omicron cases are stable. But Omicron does cause fatalities in other parts of the world. So we have to be extremely careful, especially amongst those unvaccinated people. So at the moment, we will continue to adopt the strategy that has taken Hong Kong through the last 2 years. But in the course of implementing the strategy and individual measures, I and my team will continuously review and improve and try to make life slightly less difficult for the people of Hong Kong. Dr. Choi.
So regarding the infection control requirements of this testing, indeed the restriction testing arrangement is not a new measures. We have conducted it in last 1 or more years. So the venue organizers and also with the testing operators has already a good arrangement and also infection control protocol to follow on. So I think there are several things we need to focus in reducing the risk of infection transmission during the operation. One is to avoid overcrowding and to have an orderly arrangement to test. Second is to conduct the testing in open area with good ventilations. The third is the individual practice of the swabbers during the operations, and they have to wear sufficient PPE and with good practice of infection control. And last but not the least is the hand hygiene and also the mask of the individual citizens who have undergone this testing. So during and after the test, citizens should aware of the hand hygiene and use the sterilizer to disinfect the hands after the test.
今日最後一條問題啊。
Last question, please. The lady in the front row. I'm from Ming Pao. For Kwai House on Thursday night, there was not RTD. Now, if that eventually led to a major outbreak in the community, who should be held responsible? And some experts have pointed out that with Omicron outbreak, it's possible to achieve zero infection. And then this Pakistanis woman who was quarantined in a hotel, and then she brought the disease into the community that led to an outbreak. Some experts said it's because there's a requirement for 21 days of quarantine when people arrive in Hong Kong, and that's why there is cross-contamination. So do you still insist on the target of zero, dynamic zero infection? And are there good chances that there could be a dining service again after the 4th of February? First, I invite Mr. Frank Chen to answer the question about refuse room management. That is, people were allowed to enter that room. Now, on this, I think I will leave it to the health authorities to first confirm the movements of that person. And in fact, health department colleagues mentioned at press briefings before that sometimes there may be discrepancy in people's recounting of their movements. Now, so how did he enter the reference premises? What were the circumstances? I think we have to do further investigation first. And on your other questions, first on the bigger question about our zero infection policy. the government has been adopting a dynamic zero infection policy. Of course, we know it's impossible to promise that there won't be any cases at all. For this wave of infection, there are at least 3 sources of infection. One is the roof flouting air crew members of an airline. Two, the second one is someone who's been quarantined at a hotel but who's completed quarantine and then's gone back home. The third source is imported hamsters, leading to spread of the disease. And now, of course, we couldn't control all sources of infection. Even for the roof flouting personnel, yes, we could have control, but then it's not possible for the government to make sure everyone behaves properly. In the past 2 years, we have enacted many different pieces of regulations, and there are people who've breached the regulations, and so these people were eventually prosecuted and sentenced to jail. We've seen many such cases. And of course, if it's unfortunate that someone who's flouted the rule is actually a super spreader, then it could lead to an outbreak. For hotels, they have tried very hard to meet the requirements for a quarantine hotel. Remember, at the beginning, no hotels wanted to be turned into quarantine hotels because they worried about future business prospects. But then Hong Kong needs quarantine hotel facilities for Hong Kong residents to come back. We're not even catering for travelers. And even for hotels, it's not possible to have a 100% guarantee. There are people saying at hotels that one may close the door, the other may open the door, and that could lead to infection. So don't think that just because we have a one case like this and then heads have to roll. You have seen that in the past 2 years, around the world, no one could give a 100% guarantee. Our country is doing very well, probably has done the best among the countries. But then there's no way you could keep out the disease altogether. But maybe, for example, there's been contamination of parcels or shipments and whatever. So that's why we all need to work together to fight the epidemic. Now, I believe we are able to do that. We've shown that in the past 2 years. Today, we're facing a big challenge, but I am confident as long as everybody works with the government, I believe we will be able to control the spread of Omicron in Hong Kong, and then we'll be able to keep to the good situation we saw in the past 6 months or so. Now, given the current circumstances, we have imposed, we're imposing social distancing measures for 28 days. It seems that there are slim chances of us relaxing those measures substantially on the 4th of February. But of course, I wouldn't say for sure because we're reviewing the situation every day. And if we're not able to relax the measures, or is it possible that we could make use of vaccine bubbles to relax some measures? Of course, we will consider all these issues very carefully, and we'll make timely announcement so the relevant sectors could be prepared. Now, let me add another point. So, there's one aspect of work that we haven't talked much about, that is protecting hospitals. 2 years ago, I told Professor Sophia Chow that the very first target of our work must be to prevent the collapse of our healthcare system. You could see that we have been very successful there. In other places, you have seen many healthcare workers being infected. With Omicron, it's so infectious already. There are cases where we do not have enough manpower because the healthcare workers are infected, so they couldn't help others. That's the case in other places. But fortunately, in Hong Kong, our healthcare system is still working relatively normally. That's why we must insist on preventing importation of cases, because we want to protect our healthcare system. We have identified many positive cases under the test and hold arrangement, so people had to be sent to hospitals from the airport. And that, of course, has so we are therefore sending many imported cases to our healthcare system, imposing pressure on them. So that's why with every measure we take, we have to consider its impact on the healthcare system. Apart from infected cases, hospitals have to treat other cases as well. Especially we're in winter, we have seasonal flu. And so every factor has to be taken care of in our prevention and control measures. And then we have to strike the best balance, and that will allow us the best chance to control the disease. Thank you. You have something to add? Yes, please. If I may add that now, apart from what the chief executive said about our dynamic zero infection, because more than a reporter asked about that, with dynamic zero infection, this is not something we could achieve easily. But then the SAR government has the confidence and the ability to do that. In December, we have already made preparations in case there's a fifth wave of outbreak. We have put in place various plans. So on preventing imported cases and local infection, we have various measures in place, such as contact tracing, quarantine arrangement, and also arrangement for our hospitals and so on. So we are very well prepared, and that's why now we have the capacity to take actions immediately. For example, tonight we need to do our RTD for many more blocks, so then we have the contractors ready to help us. It's because we have already forewarned contractors much earlier that if a certain situation happens, then we'll be doing this and that. And then we've also invited universities to train their nursing and medical students. So if we need to do more tests, if we need to do more vaccination, then we have the manpower to do so. Now, in the last wave of outbreak, we have already trained different government colleagues to help with contact tracing. So with our target of dynamic zero infection and our various prevention and control measures, they are based on our experience in the past years, and we always keep prepared. Thank you. That's the end of the press conference. Thank you.